Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let's Ask Paul. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host. As always, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I tell you what, the Let's Ask Paul podcast has gone crazy. Y'all all know I'm a big watcher of analytics and the things that we have, and we have the ability to watch, and we're still pumping over 300,000 downloads. And one of the reasons is because we have so much content that rolls out there on multiple podcast platforms that are shared on multiple streaming platforms, plus our videos over on the YouTube channel, plus what we stream versus restream when we're sending things out. We're constantly, so sometimes you'll get a rebroadcast or a restream of something. It's because we know that there's a lot of people out there that might not catch our live session. So we're constantly restreaming it out there, kind of like a TV channel. Like Circle Network, if you're listening to that, they constantly play reruns. I know when we do the new content, people love it. But again, there's a lot of people that might not get the opportunity to enjoy our previous content. So we keep circulating that and keeping it out there. And again, I feel you learn something new from every episode you listen to. And then you learn something maybe again from an older episode that you've listened to, and you listen to it again. So hopefully you're enjoying those, but I can tell you this is a new episode of Let's Ask Paul. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me. Again, you can listen on Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, Alexa devices. Just ask for National Electrical Code Podcast. You'll get our podcasts. In fact, the Let's Ask Paul podcast usually pops up. So many ways to listen. So again, appreciate all of you listening to us and listening to these podcasts, and hopefully you've learned something. So on today's episode, we're going to answer a question that was submitted through the Let's Ask Paul portal. And it actually was submitted by a student of ours in the Fast Tracks program. So I'm assuming the student hasn't got to that stage in the program yet that does answer this, because our Fast Tracks program gets very detailed, especially when you get to Unit 8 and dealing with single family dwellings. Then Unit 11 is multifamily dwellings, and in Unit 13 is non-dwelling applications. And we really dig deep into these calculations so that you truly understand it. But this student submitted something because we have something else built into our program, and it's basically downloadable forms. Now, these forms are here to help you understand the steps to a load calculation. You obviously can't use these forms on an exam. They're really good for the real world. You know, we laminate them, keep them in your code book. You can use a dry erase pencil or dry erase marker, and you can write on them and then erase it. And they're a great tool to use moving forward. But at the end of the day, he wants to know what happens when you have a calculation on an exam and it doesn't give you something that you would use a form for. So let me read the question, and then I'll give you guidance on what he's talking about here. It says, "Hi, Paul. I hope you and your loved ones are doing well. This is blank from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I am one of your Fast Tracks program students. I've been trying to contact you via email because I have a couple questions that I'm pretty sure you have an answer for." Okay, so real quick about our email. You can email me directly at paul, Paul.abernathy, ABERNATHY, at electricalcodeacademy.com, C-O-M. But you can also go to our website, and on our website, we have a Contact Us button. You click it, and you can send me an email directly through the website. Of course, if you download our app, you can send me a message through the app as well and ask your question. Okay, so there's so many ways you can reach out to me. You also can do what he did, and he went over to the paulabernathy.com portal, the Let's Ask Paul, which is, again, this podcast, and he submitted his question that way. So there's many ways that you can reach out to me. So if anybody ever questions how easy you can have access to me, you can have access to me multiple ways. Okay. All right. So let me go on and read it. He says, I have a question for you. It says, both questions are about the standard method load calculation for a one-family dwelling. Now, I also remind you that I did have an episode of Let's Ask Paul just recently, a podcast that goes over all of the steps for a one-family dwelling. So make sure that if that's your thing, it's about 40 minutes long. Go listen to that. It's a great, if you're on a ride or you're on a job site and you just want to blast it out loud. I'm just kind of going through the different steps and things that you have to take into consideration. But this question here is specific, and I'm going to read it to you because he's using the forms that we provide in our program, and he wants to know what would happen on an exam if they don't give me this certain information. So here's what he says. Line 2 and line 3 of the form, he says, if the exam question does not mention any small appliance or laundry brand circuits, should you use the minimum number of circuits for each line, or must you leave them blank? Okay, good question. So 210.11c is going to tell us how many small appliances we have to have, right? And it's going to tell us, and it's going to say, okay, if I've got small appliance, how many small appliance brand circuits am I required to have? Well, if you look at 210.11c1, it says it has to have at least 2. And if you look at 210.11c2, it's going to tell you I need to have at least 1 laundry. Now, of course, we're dealing with a single family dwelling, so these are given. Now, in our form, we always assume a minimum of 2 small appliance brand circuits and at least 1 laundry circuit. Now, the VA that you use in your form for this is also covered in the code, and it's something that you're going to be up in 220. And at 220.52 is going to give you those requirements, right? So it's going to tell me 220.52a, that's 1,500 VA each, and you got to have a minimum of 2. That's what we got from 210.11 C1. And it says a minimum of 1 for the laundry. We got that in 210.11 C2. Okay, and that is also 1,500 VA, and that one's found in 220.52b. Okay, so the question is, on an exam, if they're asking you for a total load calculation and they're giving you appliances, they're giving you cooking, they're giving you heating and air conditioning and all that, then you have to assume the minimum requirements of at least 2 small appliance brand circuits at 1,500 VA each and 1 laundry at 1,500 VA. Now, if they're just asking you for a simple range calculation or a simple appliance calculation or something, heating versus air conditioning calculation, then no, you wouldn't take those things into consideration because that's not what it's asking you. But if they're asking you for an entire load calculation to come up with what the service would be or what the feeder would be, then you do have to take those things into consideration. And they may not ask you for those, but you have to consider at least 2 small appliances, and you have to brand circuits, and you have to assume at least 1 laundry. Okay. Now, you don't assume a garage if they don't tell you anything about a garage, although that doesn't add any VA to the calculation. You don't have to assume for it unless they state it. But the code is very clear about you shall at least have the minimum of 2 small appliance brand circuits and a laundry. The garage only kicks in if you've got a garage, and even then, it doesn't add any VA to the calculation, right? So, and the same with the bathroom. Okay, you have to have the bathroom branch circuit to the receptacles that serve this basin, right? 20 amp, at least 1 that's going to serve that bathroom. But however, that doesn't add any additional VA to your calculation. That's absorbed in your 3 VA per square foot. So you don't have to add those in, okay? So if you're doing a calculation on an exam and it looks like it's a total load calculation and it gives you those other things, then you most certainly want to calculate that in. If they give you an exam question that says, what is the calculated load for the general lighting and general use of a single family dwelling, then you most certainly want to include those in, because that would be the 3 VA per square foot plus the minimum of 2 small appliance brand circuits plus the laundry. That way you can apply the demand factors of 220.42. Okay. So you just got to look at the question. Okay. But if it's all based on how the question is structured. If they're trying to get a total load calculation, then you most certainly want to. If they're piecemealing it, you might not necessarily do that. So hopefully that answers that question. The next question that he has says, when I compare the heat versus air conditioning and the air conditioner is larger than the heat, I have to take the air conditioner as the largest motor, right? Okay, so I've talked about this before. And when you do, and again, this is covered on my previous podcast where I do single family dwellings, as well as in our videos. If you haven't listened to or watched Coffee Hour yet, make sure you check out Coffee Hour. It's a new series we have over on the YouTube channel. And it actually gets streamed on all platforms because we stream live and recorded on LinkedIn, a bunch of Facebook channels. We on Trovo, if you're one of those gamer folks, Twitch, and all that. So you can find out all those places that we stream by going to electricianlive.com and clicking the electrify button, because that is the network that Coffee Hour is hosted on. So it will give you all the places you can listen and watch, okay, if you're interested in that. You also can just go over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/masterthenec, all one word, and you can watch there as well. All right. So the question is heat versus AC. Now, when you're dealing with heat versus AC in the 2020 edition of the National Electrical Code, you have to determine which is larger, heat or AC. Now, we're talking non-coincident loads, so you need to know that the AC is not on at the same time as the heat. However, you do have loads that might run at the same time, like an air handler. So the air handler might run when the heat's running to circulate that heat, and it might also be running when the air conditioning's running to circulate that cooling. So that is not a non-coincident load. So you're going to add the air handler to both the heat and the air conditioning in your comparison, okay? But when it comes to the AC, you have an outside compressor, okay? So you have that unit that you're dealing with. And so let me see here. Let me go on and get my code book where I'm at. So we're dealing with the compressor for that motor, the hermetic refrigerant motor. And that you would take at 125% plus the sum of the other motors that go along with it, like the fan blower and the air handler. And you're going to compare that to the heat, right? Now, if the heat is larger than the AC, even after you've done it at 125% of the air compressor plus the 100% of the other loads that are associated with the air conditioning unit, and the heat is still larger, then you totally get rid of the AC and you go fully with the heat. Remembering that the heat also includes, like for example, if it's 15 kW, but the air handler was additional 3,100 watts or VA, then you're going to add those two together, okay? And you're going to compare that to the AC, right? So at the end of the day, now, if you did that and the AC was larger than the heat, then that 25% that we do for the largest motor in the dwelling is already taken care of if the AC was larger than the heat, because you're already taking the largest motor at 125%. Now, if it's AC versus heat, and the heat is larger than the AC, and ultimately you discount and get rid of the AC, then you have to go searching for the next largest motor in the actual dwelling. And we're talking literal motor. So like garbage disposal isn't an HP, which is a horsepower rating. You wouldn't use a dishwasher because a dishwasher is an appliance with multiple stages, has the motor as well as the heating element. And so that's usually given to us in amps, and that's different. We're looking for motors, the largest motor. Okay. So when you do that, if the AC has been discarded, then you got to go searching for the next largest motor in the dwelling. And all you're trying to do is capture that 25%. That's it, in accordance with 220.50. Now, it doesn't say that in black and white, but when you go look at all of the items that's referenced in 220.50, you'll notice that everything revolves around taking that motor at 125%. Well, we've already taken that motor at its value in our calculation back when we did the appliances. So all we're trying to do is capture that missing additional 25% in order to satisfy 220.50. So all we're doing is adding that 25% to our total calculation. Ultimately, we take the total VA and divide it by the voltage, which is 240 volt, and that's going to give us the amps, and we go working from there. So hopefully that answers your question. If the AC was larger, you don't have to go searching for the largest motor if that AC motor is the largest motor in the dwelling. In most cases, it will be, okay? All right. Hopefully that answers your question. So that's it for that one. That was pretty straightforward question. Let's see what else we've got here. Let's go on and get you another one since we're only about 14 to 15 minutes in. All right. The next question we have submitted, I'll take my glasses off here. It says, okay, when swapping out an old panel to a larger one, is it required to upgrade the breakers to dual function, or can you use the standard breakers that were previously installed? Keeping the service size the same, of course. Thank you for your time and enjoy your show here on the coast of Maine. All right. Well, thank you for submitting that question. So a couple pieces about the question. It says you're swapping out an old panel to a larger one, but yet later on you said the service size is the same. So I'm assuming that you're talking about for capacity. So the older one might have 20 spaces, whatever, and you're installing one that's got 42 spaces, and yet maybe it's a 200 amp swap for a 200 amp. Okay. I'll remind you that every jurisdiction is a little different when they consider something like a heavy up or whether it's a like for like. And so make sure you check with your local jurisdiction first when you're doing something like this. But I'm gonna try to dissect what you're saying from the question, because you're saying dual function. So it looks to me like you're saying, look, I'm doing a panel change and I want to know whether or not I have to upgrade everything to AFCI protection. And that's what it looks like you're saying to me. Because dual function actually is AFCI and GFCI protection. So GFCI requirements are still going to be in 210.8. That doesn't change. A for dwelling units, sounds like what you're doing. And of course, you also have the situation where AFCIs are required in 210.12. Okay. So what you want to do is you want to get your code book, and we're going to look at 210.12 for a second and kind of explain this to you. Now, here's the key thing to remember. If you're doing a panel change, are you actually changing the branch circuit? I mean, I know you're pulling it off and you're putting it on a new breaker. Are you extending it? Are you modifying it? Anything like that? If the answer is no, that you're simply swapping a panel, putting it in and re-terminating it back on a breaker, then the answer is no, then you're not required. Again, check every jurisdiction, because sometimes they go above and beyond what the code is. Then no, you wouldn't be required to do that. And I'm going to give you the reasons here, and I'm going to give you another reason to not do it. So if you're with me, we're going to look at 210.12, and we're going to look specifically at D. Okay, D is in dog. It says branch circuit extensions or modifications. It says dwelling units, dormitory units, and guest rooms and guest suites. Now, I'm assuming you're in the 2020. I don't think you stated that, so I'm going to use the 2020. The only thing that was added new here in the 2020 was the dormitory units, guest rooms, and guest suites was added. So it still would have applied to your case, a dwelling unit, in the 2017. So there are some subtle changes here from the 2017 to the 2020. So I'm going to be explaining it in the 2020 edition. All right, it says, where branch circuit wiring for any of the areas specified in 210.12a, b, or c, and of course, A being dwelling units, that sounds like the one you're dealing with. B is dormitory, and C is guest rooms, guest suites. So again, not talking about those. Is modified, replaced, or extended. Now remember, we're talking about the branch circuit wiring. It's what it said right in the beginning. It says where branch circuit wiring for any of the areas, okay, is modified, replaced, or extended. So in your question, you're just simply swapping it out. Okay, you're doing a panel upgrade, panel change right there. Based on the NEC, you're not really modifying the branch circuit. You're not really extending the branch circuit. Okay, so that's what it says. So it tells me that if I'm modifying it, replacing it, or extending it, the branch circuit shall be protected by one of the followings. And then it tells me any of the means described in 210.12a1 through a6, which is gives you the different options to do this. Okay. All right, number 2, it says, or you can use, okay, a listed outlet branch circuit type AFCI located at the first receptacle outlet of the existing branch circuit. So if I'm going to modify, replace, or extend, if I extend that branch circuit and I put an listed outlet branch circuit type AFCI at that first receptacle on the circuit, then I'm okay to extend it or modify it. Okay. Other than that, I can use either of these options, or I go back and I use one of the options in A1 through A6. Now, there is an exception here. Now, this is a very important exception. Here's what it says. It says AFCI protection shall not be required where the extension of the existing branch circuit conductors is not more than 6 feet and does not include any additional outlets or devices other than splicing devices. That measurement shall not include the conductors inside an enclosure, cabinet, or junction box. Okay, so let me bring this into context to your question. Let's say you're doing the service change and you need to move this panel 5 feet to the left because of where it's at for whatever reason. So theoretically, you're splicing inside of the old cabinet in order to extend them to the new cabinet. You with me? So you're extending those branch circuits. However, based on this exception, as long as you're not extending them more than 6 feet, and that doesn't include the wiring in the cabinet, that's from the cabinet to cabinet, then if that's what you're doing, then that's an exception to this rule. You don't have to provide the AFCI protection. And I'm assuming that's where you're going when you're asking about the dual function, which is, again, a GFCI AFCI device. A combination AFCI is looking for series and parallel arcs, so there is a difference, so we don't confuse the two. But I'm assuming your question is asking about the AFCI requirement, kicking that in. Okay. Hopefully that answers that question. But also, it was important to state, even if you're doing remodeling and you're extending a branch circuit because of remodeling, but you're not adding additional outlets, you're not adding any additional devices, all you're doing is splicing it to move it, extend it because of the splicing, but you're not adding any additional. As long as that extension is not more than 6 feet, okay, then you're okay. You don't have to change it and all of a sudden put AFCI devices or anything in the panel. So this is huge because some jurisdictions will ignore this and say, look, anytime you do any of this, I want AFCI. And that is obviously under their purview, but at the end of the day, they're going over and above. But I would ask for that in writing rather than just somebody's personal will. Make sure that's what they're doing as a whole and you're not being singled out. Because the code does have an exception for this, so make sure you utilize the exception. But remember, there are jurisdictions that remove exceptions. They do modify something and change it. I know Virginia, for example, modifies AFCI requirements when it comes to 1 and 2 family dwellings. So keep those things in mind. Always be aware of your local rules and any amendments you might have, but that is purely what the NEC says. So if you're looking from the NEC perspective. So 210.12d is going to be your guide. If you're just doing a panel change and you're not modifying, extending, or doing anything to those branch circuits, you're not adding new outlets, you're not adding new devices, you're whatever, then you're okay. Nothing would invoke you to have to do it. Can you do it if you want? Absolutely. If you want to upsell to do that to the customer and give them added protection on that branch circuit, go for it. Got to remember that some branch circuits of older systems that you're upgrading the panel still might not be compatible to work like a shared neutral, and you might have to buy special breakers in order to make that work. But just be aware of all that because that could come into play. But overall, you're not required to do it based on the National Electrical Code. Okay? So hopefully that answered your question when it came to that question. And for all you out there that want your questions answered or you want my opinion on it, okay, whether you agree or disagree with it, I'm going to give you my opinion and I'm going to stand by it, and you can like it or hate it or not listen or whatever. I don't really care. I'm here to help you. So my feelings don't get hurt when it comes to that. So you can listen or not. Now, if you want to get exclusive content, go over to our members area over on electricalcodeacademy.net. You got a members area, subscribe, and you can get access to things that the general public can't get access to, webinars that they can't get access to. You can join me on our Wednesday nights to ask questions that the general public can't have access to. That is a $9.99 a month, or you can do $120 a year, or I think it's $119 a year. Anyway, it's worth the price of admission alone for the content that we have in there. And we're always adding new stuff like our recordings of our Wednesday night sessions for you to go back and watch. Those are 3 and 4 hours long sometimes. So there's a lot of information. You can pause it, look it up, pause it, work it to your need. That's what members get. Okay. So if you're interested in that, check out the website. Hopefully you got something out of today's lesson. If you want to submit a question to me, go to paulabernathy.com and you too can submit your question and I will answer it either on a podcast or via email. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless.